Yeah guys, today we are learning about 5 of the most important American accents. So if you watch this lesson until the end, you will be able to understand Americans more confidently. You'll be able to differentiate between these different accents, and you might even be able to spot where a particular American comes from. Alright, so before we get into any of that, I quickly want to let you know that if you are new here, every single week we make new lessons just like this one so that you can understand fast-speaking natives without getting lost, without missing the jokes, and without subtitles. Just like our fan Fernando, who says that thanks to our lessons, he feels so much more comfortable understanding natives. And you will too, so hit that subscribe button and the bell below and you won't miss a single one of our new lessons.
And you say either.
You say neither.
And you say neither.
Either.
Either.
Neither.
Neither.
Let's call the whole thing.
So as an English learner, I'm sure that you've heard the terms British English and American English. But these are such broad classifications because really in each type of English like this, we have a wide range of regional varieties. So you might have already seen that Andrea actually did 2 videos covering 10 different real British accents. Now an accent is comprised of the words that people from a certain area use, as well as pronunciation differences. In this lesson, I'm going to show you 5 real American regional accents. And those are New York, the Midwest, the South, Texas, and Southern California. Now you probably know there are many varieties of British English. Sometimes it even changes with a 20-minute drive in the car. It's hard to say how many varieties of English there are in the United States, but it's certainly less. It depends on how you want to cut the pie, or in other words, where you want to set the limits of where one accent ends and a new one begins. I was shocked that in one article I saw counted more than 20 American accents. Alright, so first let's take a look at the New York accent. So actually we did a poll and you guys told us that this was the American accent that you were most interested in learning about. And in fact, in New York City alone, there are actually several different accents that you can find. So if you would like to learn more just about those different varieties, be sure to give this lesson a like to let me know and we'll make a lesson on that, alright? So when I think about the New York accent, certainly one of the first things that comes to mind is that people who have a thick New Yorker accent often don't pronounce their R's. Notice how George from Seinfeld pronounces park.
Oh, I can't wait to read my Time magazine. Last copy, too. Maybe I'll read it tomorrow in the park. Supposed to be a beautiful day. Have a nice life. Sentence settings.
This phenomenon is called rhoticity or artfulness. Now, maybe you know from our UK accents video that in most UK accents they don't pronounce R's, so they have non-rhotic accents. American accents are rhotic, with the exception of some New England accents and some African American vernacular accents. Let's check out Robert De Niro's New York accent in this movie.
Weren't you told 1,000 times not to go near that bar?
But Ma, I worked for it.
Well, what do you mean you work for it? You're not supposed to be in that bar.
I'm taking this money back. I'm bringing it right back down to the bar.
Well, let's just think about this for a minute.
What do you mean think about? What are you talking about?
Well, I mean, we could use the money. It's not here to do something bad. We could use it.
Now let's look a little bit at the history of why most American accents kept their R while British accents became non-rhotic. So when in the 17th century Britain colonized America, nearly all dialects of English were rhotic, and most North American English simply remained that way. Accents in Great Britain, on the other hand, evolved to drop the R when it's in the final position. Now let's look at a clip of an authentic New Yorker.
I can use no windows in my apartment. Winter windows, storm windows. This is Junior. Junior, what you do? You buy new curtains? Putting up new curtains?
Did you notice the way he says, "What are you doing?"
Junior, what you do? You buy new curtains?
Now let's listen to how Robert De Niro says, "Where did you get this?"
What's this?
What's what, Dad?
Where'd you get this? Your mother found this behind your drawer.
Nowadays, this is a common occurrence in colloquial English, but is especially prominent in different New York accents. So when we have a T followed by a Y sound, it actually morphs into a ch sound. So what you will become what you, but you becomes but you. And the same thing happens when we have a D sound followed by a Y sound. But instead of becoming a ch, it becomes a J sound. So where did you becomes where'd you. Now we'll watch a clip from Friends where 3 characters have a strong Italian New York accent. So in this clip, Joey says, "I want you right here," as "I want you right here."
Oh, well, you left your good hair at my apartment. I figured you'd need it tomorrow for your meeting.
Thank you.
Look, I shouldn't have come. I better get going. I don't want to miss the last train.
No, hon, I don't want you taking that thing to swing this.
Oh, where am I going to stay? Here?
Whoa-ho. We'll go to a hotel.
Go to a hotel.
No, you won't.
No, we won't.
If you go to a hotel, you'll be doing stuff. I want you right here where I can keep an eye on you.
You're gonna keep an eye on us.
That's right, mister. And I don't care how old you are, as long as you're under my roof, you're gonna live by my rules.
So also in this clip, we could see that Joey said, "keep an eye on you," as simply "keep an eye on ya." So what did he do there? He connected some of the words and he reduced you to simply ya. Now, while this is not completely unique of the New York accent, you can find this done in other parts of the United States, I would say that it is particularly common among certain New Yorkers. Now we have a couple more great examples in this clip of that non-rhotic R that we talked about. So let's take a look at that and pay special attention for that R.
Where am I going to stay? Here? Where am I going to stay? Here?
That's right, mister. That's right, mister.
So another way that the New York accent can be recognized is by the extremely drawn out way in which they say words like walk and talk. So they might say something like walk and talk. To illustrate this, this is the dad with the strongest New York accent, a TikTok video that has recently gone viral.
I walk and I talk and I live in New York and I drink water with my coffee. I told my daughter, don't feed the dog coffee, but she does the exact opposite. She feeds the dog coffee, and now I have a dead dog, a dumb daughter, and no coffee.
So in a standard American accent, we would say these words with an ah sound. So dog, coffee. But New Yorkers can really exaggerate that sound, really drawing it out as we said before. So instead, they would say dog, coffee. So it almost can sound even like it becomes 2 syllables. Now let's go back to that clip from Friends and take a look at how Ronnie said tomorrow, because she does the same thing here.
Well, you left your good hair at my apartment. I figured you'd need it tomorrow for your meeting.
So I would say tomorrow, but she said it the same way that New Yorkers would say coffee, tomorrow. And in that first clip we watched from Seinfeld, George said it this way too.
Maybe I'll read it tomorrow in the park.
Some of Robert De Niro's and Martin Scorsese's film showed the strong influence that Italian had on some New York accents. So let's take a look at a clip from Goodfellas and we'll highlight this a bit for you.
Really funny. Really funny. What do you mean I'm funny? It's funny, you know. It's a good story. It's funny. You're a funny guy. What do you mean? You mean the way I talk? What? It's just, you know, you're just funny. It's funny, you know, the way you tell the story and everything.
Funny how? I mean, what's funny about it?
Tommy, no, you got it all wrong.
Oh, Anthony. He's a big boy. He knows what he said. What'd you say?
You're right.
Funny how? What?
Just, you know, you're funny.
You mean, well, let me understand, but I'm funny how? I mean, funny like I'm a clown, I amuse you? I make you laugh? What do you mean funny? Funny how? How am I funny?
No, just, you know how you tell a story. What?
No, I don't know. You said it. How do I know? You said I'm funny.
So if you want a great way to learn all about connected speech and the New York City accent, among others, I have a fantastic resource for you. It's our Fluent with Friends course. Now in this course, over 48 weeks, you will learn side by side with episodes from the TV series Friends. In addition to improving your pronunciation, you'll learn thousands of words that Americans really use in their everyday speech, along with understanding all the jokes by learning the cultural context. So the best part is you can try that absolutely free with our 3-part masterclass. You can sign up by clicking up here or down in the description below. All right, so we're moving west now over to this area called the Midwest. Now this is a very large area with several different accents, and we've chosen to focus in particular on the one from the state of Michigan. Now my mom actually comes from Michigan, so this one has a spot near and dear to my heart. Now something funny that Michiganders will do is that they'll add an S to the end of brand names. So instead of saying the car company Ford, they'll say Fords. Or the supermarket chain Kroger, they would say as Krogers. So a common feature of the Michigan accent is more common use of the glottal T. So Eminem comes from Detroit, which is the largest city in Michigan, and he does this. So we can notice that instead of saying got it, he says got it. I would actually use an American T here, so I would say it as got it. Or instead of don't, he says don't.
When it boils down to it, it's what the person is saying. It's just, music is just like football or any sport. If you're good at it, you're good at it, and it don't care what color you are, what you look like, or nothing like that. You know what I'm saying? If you're good, you're good. If you got it, you got it. If you don't, you don't.
Now the sound, as in father, is more drawn out in the Michigan accent. This is sometimes even referred to as the Michigan A. So instead of saying mom, they would say man. And instead of saying hockey, they would say hacky. And instead of saying Chicago, they would say Chicago.
What's the matter?
We're being evicted.
Come on, Mom.
All right, so now we're moving south. And once again, the South is a big region and it has many different varieties of the Southern accent. So we're going to focus particularly on the accent from the state of Louisiana with Reese Witherspoon.
Say every time you come, you have that Southern hospitality. You're always bringing me something.
Yes! Well, I brought you my Christmas tea this time.
Something I find really interesting about Southern accents like Reese's is that it's really sing-songy, which means that it has a sort of melody when people speak that makes it almost sound more musical. Now, before we really talk about the accent, there's an interesting piece of cultural information here. So Ellen mentioned Southern hospitality. Now this is based on the stereotype that Southern people are really warm, friendly, and welcoming when you go to their home, or even when you visit the South in general if you're not from there. So a common feature of the Louisiana accent, which is actually true of most Southern accents, is the pronunciation of the ah sound. So Louisiana obviously has a lot of unique characteristics to its accent, and we'll look at those, but this one I thought was really important to start with. So they will actually add an extra sound to this ah sound. So they add an to the end of it, so it becomes So a word like have becomes have. So in this clip, we can see that Reese Witherspoon says the word dance in this way.
And so I brought you this one, because I know how you like to dance, and this is about, you know, cute, adorable things dancing, just like you.
New Orleans, Louisiana is one of the United States' hottest spots for immigration. Throughout its history, the diversity of New Orleans has rivaled that of pretty much any other city on the map. Throughout the 19th century, people came from Ireland, Germany, and Italy, and it was this group that had the biggest impact on New Orleans English. So the English spoken in New Orleans is called Yat. Now why does it have this funny name? So it actually comes from how they would say, "Where are you at?" They shorten this to "Where Yat?" And a person who speaks Yat would also be called a Yat. So here's how actor Anthony Mackie describes the New Orleans accent.
I had a thicker New Orleans accent. New Orleans accent is very different than the South. It's its own thing. It's kind of like a mixture of Brooklyn meets the South. So if you ever meet somebody and they say they're from New Orleans and they go, "Hey y'all," they lying. Their ass is from Texas and they're trying to be cool.
So he said that the New Orleans accent is actually similar to the Brooklyn accent. Now how can this be true when these two parts of the country are so far apart? Now we mentioned when we talked about the New York accent that it is non-rhotic in many cases. This is also true of that Yat accent. The reason why these two accents are connected by this feature is both New York City and New Orleans attracted German, French, Italian, and Irish immigrants, with a heavy emphasis on the last two. And just by having these populations in common, they ended up sounding similar. So do you want to learn more about the Southern accent, which is one of the most common ones in the United States, so that you can understand native speakers like Reese Witherspoon better? Then I highly recommend you check out this lesson that we did recently, talking all about the unique characteristics of the Southern accent in the United States with actress Jennifer Lawrence. Moving on to our fourth real American accent, we have Texas. Now, Texas is big. In fact, it's the second biggest state in the United States after Alaska, and it's bigger than most countries like France, Germany, and Iraq. So we can still talk about, despite the size, a general Texan accent. So what are some of the unique characteristics of this accent? So sounds are somewhat produced at the back of the mouth by raising the tongue. And what this does is it forces the air out through the nose, which can make the Texan accent sound a little bit more nasal than other accents.
The back of the tongue is braced up against the back molars, and the opening in the back of the throat is so small that sometimes you get that nasal, twangy sound that you hear right now.
Twang is something associated with Southern and Texan accents, which I talked all about in that lesson I mentioned with Jennifer Lawrence. So many significant peculiarities of this accent are in the way that vowels are said. So in the diphthong O, which is pronounced in most American accents, like in the word no, in Texas it can be pronounced differently. So let's take a look at this clip with Matthew McConaughey, who's from Texas, and the way that he says the word goal. So I say goal, now let's listen to him.
So really my goal, my purpose as the Minister of Culture, is to have that arena be the last place any visiting basketball team wants to play.
So the Texan accent is a lot like the rest of the southern area of the United States. However, how Matthew pronounces his R's in this clip is completely unique to the Texan accent.
So really my goal, my purpose as the Minister of Culture, is to have that arena be the last place any visiting basketball team wants to play.
What's more, Texans have a way of using the ah sound in words like pie and night. So instead it will sound like pa and night.
It's just like real round in your mouth and you're just like, hey y'all, how we doing tonight? Are you guys gonna go down to the game this weekend? I'm so excited. Like Joshua's doing real great this year.
Finally, Texans are famous for their way of saying the second person plural. Now, in most parts of the United States, you would find people say one of these three. You guys, whether you're referring to men or women, or you all. However, what Texans do is they take this last one and they scrunch it all together. So they say y'all.
And you're just like, hey y'all, how we doing tonight? Are you guys gonna go down to the game this weekend? I'm so excited. Like Joshua's doing real great this year.
All right, so finally, let's take a look at the California accent. In particular, the SoCal accent, as opposed to the NorCal accent, which is spoken in cities like San Francisco and Oakland. So earlier in the video, we looked at New York accents, and there's always been this sort of East Coast and West Coast comparison, or we could even call it a rivalry. So accents are no exception, so let's take a look at how some of these people from New York make fun of the LA accent and some of their mannerisms too.
Can I have like, is there like, I don't know, like a sandwich?
So the joke here is that he says like a lot. Now this is because Californians, and in particular those who tend to talk like a Valley girl, which we'll look at in a moment, are notorious for using the word like way too much. So let's take a look at an example with singer Billie Eilish, who's from Los Angeles.
We would watch the Spice World. Like, I watched that movie like 40 times, and I thought it was like a fictional movie about a group of girls who were in a group and they sang.
And just for fun, let's look at a resident of Los Angeles making fun of the New York accent.
Do an impression of a New Yorker ordering a slice of pizza.
Hey, yo, Mom, you want to get some pizza over there? Please, cheese on the double. Make me some coffee, too.
Now that's just the Italian New York accent stereotype. Likewise, the impressions of the Californian accent were influenced by stereotypes. So let's look more closely at the SoCal accent. So California became the most diverse US state, as English speakers from a wide variety of backgrounds began to pick up different linguistic elements from one another and also developed new ones as a group. So when it comes to the California accent, there are two very established stereotypes. So girls supposedly talk like the typical Valley girl, and guys supposedly talk like a surfer dude. Now this comes because surfing is a very popular sport in California, which has a very long coastline on the Pacific. As defined by Merriam-Webster, a Valley girl is a stereotype of an adolescent girl from the San Fernando Valley, a suburb of LA. It's one whose values, mannerisms, and especially speech patterns resemble those of such a girl. Here's Amelia Clark, who's from London's incredible impersonation of a Valley girl.
I'd love to hear your American accent, because I'm always interested, because I don't think we even have I guess in certain regions we have accents, but
yeah,
but we do, obviously.
My American accent, like you heard on Terminator, kind of changed a little bit into Callie from the Valley.
It's like this, she's like this whole like situation. That was amazing.
Wow, that's actually very good.
Thank you.
Did you base that on someone you know?
I like love Clueless.
Like right now, for example, the Haitians need to come to America. But some people are all, what about the strain on our resources? And it's like, when I had this garden party for my father's birthday, right? People came that like did not RSVP. So I was like totally bugging. I had to haul ass to the kitchen, squish in extra place settings, but by the end of the day, it was like the more the merrier.
And this person here does a great job of impersonating the surfer dude.
Hey, dude, totally awesome, dude. Where's my surfboard? My surfboard.
There's another very prominent feature of the Southern California accent, which is known as uptalk or upward inflection. Now, this is the phenomenon where people are speaking and they sort of end their sentences in an upward way. And this makes it sound as if they were asking a question even though they're just making a statement. So let's look at some examples of this.
And he would literally tell me that I was so good at singing that he thought that he was bad at singing. So we both had these like opposite strengths, we felt like. I remember at the beginning there was all these labels and radio people that wouldn't play me because I was too sad and no one was gonna relate to it. I've been kind of coming out of it for the last like 6 months actually, which feels like that to me.
So most Californians don't distinguish between the ah and ah sound, which are the vowels in words like caught and caught. Now, this is referred to sometimes as the caught-caught merger. This is a phonetic phenomenon where the vowel of the word lot, for example, merged completely with that of thought. So with the merger, caught and caught become perfect homophones. All right, so I hope that you have found this lesson super useful, that you'll have some fun putting it into practice, trying to differentiate the different accents in the United States because we have such a wide variety of them. Now, if there's some accents that we didn't cover or another one that you would like to learn more about, then why don't you let me know down in the comments below and maybe we'll make our next lesson on it. All right, so now it's time to go beyond the classroom and live your English. Aw, yeah.
Hang on, we had done this photo. How does this work?
It's a magazine. Oh, wait,
So
is that
we had
what it
done
does?
this photo where my hair's all greasy.
Yeah.
And so the next day I showed up and I tried to wash my hair like 6 times and it just was not going anywhere. And so I showed up, I hadn't seen him since I was like 15 and all sweaty and disgusting. I showed up like a grease ball.